Good morning, all. Well, Dr. Bassem, we thank him for his speech, and I'd just like to give a briefing that is different than what he presented. It's a perspective about Palestine and the world system. I will talk about 200 years in a world system. What has happened in these 2 years? I don't want to refer to history as history directly, but I'm using the historical development on our case since the beginnings of the Napoleon campaign on Egypt in 1799, and when it was a small news in Le Monde in 1970-99 newspaper where there was a call from Napoleon to all leaders in Asia and Africa to come under his umbrella to restore his glory. So they were partnerships, old partnerships. And also about his view, European view about the relationship of Jews to Israel, to Palestine, and reviving the role of the Jews. So that was also just a passing by thing. But then things have evolved after the Napoleon defeat and the Vienna Accord. That was the basis of the new system in 1815, which has for the principles of the French Revolution and maintained, and it was supported by Britain. So in the 19th century, there was a bigger development of the national feelings for those who have boycotted the three emperors, Russian Emperor, Austrian Russian Empire, and Hungarian one. What we care about in the 19th century is that there were two cases that were related basically to the case of Palestine. They have occupied the world system then. It's the Eastern case and the Jewish case, and both were linked to our case. Basically, everybody's looking for the Eastern case, meaning that to share and participate the inheritance of that Eastern Ottoman Empire that was retreating since the beginnings of the 18th century, and it was glorified in all its dimensions of the 19th century. So it was how to divide the inheritance of this empire that stretches over three continents. So Britain had a different view. It was exemplified by Bentinson in 1939 to 42 that it's not yet the time to take the biggest share from the Ottoman Empire. We need to take it easy until time comes to get the biggest share for Britain's interests from the Ottoman state. The other case was about the Palestinian case. It was a national case, and it had to do with a Jewish issue. The nature of the affiliation with about the Jews in Europe. Then there was a case that has stamped out. What about the Jews? Where do we position them? They're there as a power. They were they were seen clearly, very visible in the European empires, in the Russian Empire, in the Austrian Empire. So they were looking about the national case. It is they needed to have a state, and many of my students, when I teach about the modern world order, they're not aware that the number of states in the 19th century in Europe was very limited, and not over the number of the fingers of two hands. So how would they know about that there are countries that were looking for a state for another nation? Jews were needed state as they saw it, and of course they none of the Europeans wanted to have them on their continent, and so this is where the case stemmed in Julius and Czechoslovakia, and in the GUP, and which is western of Ukraine, to So the attempt came with the pressures to make use of the weakness of the Ottoman Empire and to get more involved in the uh, Jews. So there are two interlinked causes, and this is where settlement started to infiltrate in Palestine through the different missions, exploratory missions, and so on, and having the new Petah Tikva colony and Rishon LeZion, and so on. This is how the migration cycle started to Palestine in the 19th century, and of course, it was more exemplified with the politicization of the Zionist organized movement in 1897, and the decision to establish their own state on the land of Palestine and to look for a proxy, an agent who would supervise, who would execute this project. So then World War I came. Which included the demolition of the world system of Vienna and other empires who were there after the Vienna system. That was reflected on that had its reflections on our area, especially here in Palestine. And with that, where the Zionist movement was able to make it to decision makers in the US and Britain, that was expressed by the Balfour Declaration on November 2nd, 1917. This declaration was not a declaration that because that guy wanted to slept and woke up and said, we want to give them a state. It was worked on for 10 or 12, 11 years until this declaration was declared that they were empathic with the Israelis. And of course, the main force was the US and his and the lawyer Brundai and his with Wilson, and also the first Zionist minister at the British government, which was, of course, exemplified in the occupation of Aleppo and Palestine, and to have the state that Israel should have a national home in Palestine, and then where it was legitimized by the UN because the Balfour Declaration became one of the mandates decisions. To give the land to Jews, and of course it had to do with Sykes-Picot Convention and so on. So this is when we became, where we confronted this. We had this British mandate that was supporting having to have an Israeli and Jewish homeland for the Zionists, and then the Higher Commission was the one to implement the statehood, the Jewish statehood. In the 20s, it was a heated activity to bring in immigrants to Palestine. They've erupted the settlements, and the mandate has given the Zionist movement to control Palestine two main things. First, water and electricity. They were exclusively controlled by the Zionist movement with all its institutions. In the 20s of the last century. In the 30s, Hitler was in power, and he implemented his idea in to resolve the Jewish conflict. And we said that Marx had his ideas about the Jews in his in the community, about having an entity outside Europe. So Hitler had the final decision to exterminate Jews and get rid of them to finish and resolve this issue. But the Zionist movement and many times tries to forget or abandon the heated collaboration with Hitler regarding the migration of Jews to Palestine during his power and the starting to implement the start of the implementation of his project to have a final solution for the Jewish case. The 500,000 immigrants reached Palestine at the end of the 30s, and then the big revolution erupted in 1936, which required that Britain, where the revolution was at a point where Britain tried to contain the whole issue, because in 1938 the Munich conference was held between Britain and Germany, and it was clear that it was the beginnings of the Second World War on the door, around the corner. So it was just to gain interest for itself and gain Arabs to its side. So they tried to gain them to support them in the second coming World Wars. So they held the St. James Conference in London to have a comparative relationships with the Arabs and in their ideas and their ideologies regarding the Palestinian state. And in order to gain so they promised them that the immigration should stop, and there will be in 10 years time things will stop. And they were against the British state, and they've changed the powers from Britain in 1942 to the U.S. in Baltimore for the Zionist movement. And the U.S. then became the main auspices for and host for the Zionist case, and this is where it was the big people. This is when they started to do these terrorist acts in the Zionist movement, led by Begin and Shamir, and who became figures and known figures in the Zionist entity. The blockade of horizons have made Palestine's case go to the UN, which was a new establishment. It was established in 1945, but this is where the U.S. government had completely supported the Zionist project with all its numbers. The number of members of UN were 57 countries, and the member countries, and the partition decision was in 1942, and it had an economic impact by the US, who were opposing, for the countries who were opposing the partition decision that was issued in 1947. The war erupted between the Arab armies and Israel in 1948, after the announcement of the establishment of Israel in 1948, and the entry of the Arab armies who were trying to protect Palestine from the formation of the Jewish state. So this is where a new case happened, that the state of Israel has started, and we became refugees without any political rights, and actually they occupied the biggest part of Palestine in 1948, and this is when in the polarization of the world, they recognize the Israeli Zionist movement. It was the Soviet Union and the USA, and this is when things became the world became dual polarized. The Palestinian case was absented. And if we look at the system, with all the attempts to establish a political Palestinian entity, and the struggle within the PLO and all that followed the dissolvement of USSR and the establishment of a uni-polarized system headed by the USA had entered to this equation, new emerges, entering new concepts that are related to the resolution of this conflict. They took us into a myth that was never there in the political sciences and international relations. It's called the peace process. It's like to build trust between two entities, occupier and occupant. And the dilemma of the Palestinian, of the Israeli and American statehood. When we talk about peace process, this is derived from other sciences related to chemistry, to physics, and not to political issue discussed. We need a permanent auspices. So all attempts have failed to solve the Palestinian case, and we've become under the hegemony of the US, and now, and after the war of Gaza that we are now witnessing, and the Lebanon war that is following the war of Gaza, what do we expect from the Palestinian case within this system that is currently, as Dr. Bassem has said, that we're still living in this interim period. Palestine, in this case, is being transformed from one form to another. Where do we stand? I don't want to repeat what Dr. Bassem had just presented. China, the third, it's the second partner to Israel, the second ally to Israel after the US. It supports in its newspaper, its media, promotes the right of Palestinians to have their own state, or the two-state solution. The two-state solution, okay, but where's the implementation of the two-state solution? Where this is where things stop. The other trap is Russia, which basically has a big Jewish community, and they have a big impact in the Russian economy, and they do support the Palestinian right for having their own state and independent state. Yet we stop here, and then we ask, what next? What are the procedures for this implementation? Is it after the war of Gaza or Lebanon? Did Russia or China have withdrew their ambassadors? They imposed embargoes. All these transformations in the world system and the global system, and 2 years ago till now, since 200 years ago, have done nothing. And the sole winner in all this was the Zionist movement, with no doubt. And what happened after the Gaza war was that the whole eruption in the whole world to defend Israel, to serve Israel. We're talking about a state that was attacked by some hundreds of armed people, would not require all the forces of Germans, British, and US troops to defend it, as if it's about to fall apart and that the Zionist project was completely demolished. No, it is farther than this. The case is farther, and the Zionist movement is a project, their project before any other project. What is our role here? That's the main question. We as Palestinians, we talked what we've been subject to throughout the past 200 years. But what is our role now? What should we do? What are we required to do? Nothing. Just be resilient. Our resilience in our homeland throughout all the what we've been exposed to has despite our divisions, our disagreements, my colleague talked about to have a comprehensive project to all Palestinians, inclusive one. Well, then we should all agree about the priorities of this project. We need to agree about the outlines of this project. We need to agree on the end point of this project. It's not. When you talk about national unity. Based on what? What are the vocabularies of this unity? Where would it take us to in order to resolve this what we did throughout the 200 years? And that we need to get rid of this curse. And we were always the losers. When we hear a unilateral or polarization, U.S. unipolarization, that it's the right to defend the people. And when we hear about the Nazis and that Hitler had a right to defend himself because he was attacked. So this is very sarcastic. All that was done from Israel had all made mock of all human rights issues. The Israeli representative at the UN is there, and the UN is even cannot even explain or express its opinion. Israel, the UN Secretary General said, well, Israel, we care about it, as if Israel is a persona non grata. And as if we, and this, so we try to be actors and not something just made for us, but we cannot. Thank you very much.